Aloha and welcome to E Hana Kako. That means let's work together, and that's what we believe at the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. You're watching the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, and we're here every week. I'm delighted today that we're going to do something a little bit in-house. As you know, Grassroot Institute is a public policy research institute. People like to say that's a think tank. Well, what do we do in a think tank? Well, we sit around and think and we talk and so forth. There are really two things that Grassroot Institute does. We research and bring researchers together so that the best ideas on any subject dealing with the government, society, or the economy can be developed here for Hawaii and the Asia-Pacific region. So that's the first part. That's the think tank side of what we do. The second side of what we do is we actually help to try to build a better economy, build a better government, and build a better society. So you'll see us down there at the legislature or in public events, doing education, talking to policymakers and so forth, so that we can help Hawaii be a center for good policy. And those are two different aspects. One is the thinking side, the other is the doing side. And, you know, to the chagrin of my wonderful daughter, I'm going to tell you that I came up with a phrase I coined. She told me never to use it. But we're not just a think tank, we're also a do tank. Now I can hear her saying, Daddy, I don't believe you did that. But today I want to welcome you. E komo mai, welcome in. Whether you are here in Hawaii or across the world, as Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network goes out on the internet and on channels all over the planet, we want to say aloha. And we want to bring you into our house today for some policy talk between some of our policy advisors. I am welcoming today a gentleman who is now the next grassroots scholar here working with us to develop good policy. He's a political economist, a PhD in political science, and a professor at West Liberty University. He's in Chicago now, and we will find some way to get him, to lure him to relocate to Hawaii. But until then, I would like to just introduce you to the man behind the laughter, which you just heard, Dr. Erik Root. Erik, aloha. Hey. Say hi to our audience.
Aloha, thank you very much for having me today, and I'm really excited to be part of the show.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and really this is a momentous event. You know, we welcome you on board as a grassroots scholar. You make this think tank, the Grassroot Institute, your home, and you plan to contribute from your great, immense background, your knowledge, your writings, and so forth. Tell us, in what areas have you specialized in terms of political economy, and tell us a little bit about your writings.
Sure, you bet. I have specialized, especially in terms of state and local politics, on the, you might say, the ground level, with issues related to city budgets, a little bit, eminent domain issues, property rights issues, homeowners associations issues, anything that really pertains to private property on the state and local level I've been involved in, including taxation and, you know,
sure.
Along those lines. Most of my writings have been really related to the rights that we all share, the inherent rights that come with us, if you will, from the Declaration of Independence. And with that, the right to earn that by the sweat of our brow, which we earn, and keep our property, and not to mention our funds, our money, and with as little intrusion in the government as possible.
Well, you know, we share a heartbeat, and Hawaii is a wonderful place to look at policy relating to land usage, land ownership, and the relationship between the people who own the land, or maybe should own the land, and the government. Right. We're going to come back to you in just a moment, because I don't want to leave hanging our other companion today for our policy talk. She happens to be a former intern here at Grassroot Institute, living in California, and continues now as a policy intern with Grassroot Institute. She's got a lot of expertise when it comes to issues that we care about here in Hawaii. You may have read some of her writings on the Grassroot Institute website, but I would like to welcome to our program today, as a member of the team, Kelsey Winther. Kelsey, hi, how are you?
Hey, doing well, thank you.
Well, how's everything up there in your part of California? I know it's a little warmer than Erik's Chicago right now.
Yes, I think so.
You know, when you were here with Grassroot Institute a few years ago, and subsequently, along with your engagement in other think tanks, you have developed an interest in various topics that are important to us. What are some of those topics and some of those issues that have interested you?
Yeah, some of the things that I started researching when I was with the Grassroot Institute, which is probably about 4 years ago now, was a lot of the unfunded liabilities that are really causing serious economic problems in Hawaii, specifically looking at the public employee pension program and the fact that simply it's not adequately funded. And when compared against employee pension programs in other states, Hawaii per capita is most in deficit on their employee pension program. So I did quite a bit of research on that issue, looking into what are some practical ways that we could recover that and actually be able to make that program solvent. Additionally, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Kelsey, that's very fascinating. All I was going to say is that issue you studied several years ago and did research for us on is very much alive. Guess what? The unfunded liabilities haven't gone anywhere. And so we're dealing with that right now. And I hope that Erik, you and I can talk about it a bit. But let me let you finish up with what you were saying about some of the issues you're interested in.
Sure. Additionally, I'm very interested in education. I think Hawaii is a very interesting place to study some of the different forms of education, as well as some of the problems that we see present in the current education policy, seeing the strong impact that unions have on our education policy and the way that it can really inhibit quality education from taking place.
Well, you certainly are contemporary with issues that are important. In fact, before we proceed, I'd like to point out that as we broadcast now, we are in the midst of National School Choice Week 2014, which is an event that celebrates the opportunity and freedom that Americans have to choose the kind of education that they want their children to have and to spend their tax dollars in a way that helps them to best honor their intentions about educational choice. It doesn't happen to the extent that we'd like to see it happen across the country, but there is a wonderful organization, National School Choice Week, that celebrates it annually, and we're very pleased that here in Hawaii we're a partner. Grassroot Institute is a partner with the National School Choice Week, and so far we're aware of at least 33 events that are taking place this week here in the state of Hawaii at various schools and institutions and organizations. One of them that took place actually last week was the kickoff. We had the opportunity at our Grassroot Institute Calabash to have Michael Medved, who's well known throughout the country for his commentary and his former career as a film critic, come out here and lead the charge and help us kick off National School Choice Week. This week, we have with us in several appearances Ilya Shapiro, a constitutional scholar and a senior fellow in the Cato Institute, and he's going to be doing many things with us. And you're certainly welcome to be part of any of that. Just go to our website, grassrootinstitute.org. That's grassrootinstitute.org. And of course, with Grassroot, it's only singular, Grassroot. Now, back to Erik and Kelsey. Erik, Kelsey brought up a very important issue, and that is the unfunded liabilities. Here in our state, one of the issues that fiscal policy must deal with is the fact that we have the highest per capita rate of unfunded liabilities in the entire nation. And what we're talking about is the amount of money that the government owes due to the pensions and the health care plans for government employees in the government unions. And this is a problem nationwide, as you know. I think that the total is about $5 trillion of what is owed across the country by governments. And we saw in one city recently, Detroit, a virtual bankruptcy largely caused because of the inability to pay these unfunded liabilities. Erik, any thoughts you have from a fiscal point of view, fiscal policy point of view here? What can we possibly do about this? I've asked you a tough question, haven't I? You know, we're having some technical difficulties, so I'm going to shift over to Kelsey here. Kelsey, you know, can anything be done? Have you seen some of the potential solutions there are to this problem of unfunded liabilities?
Sure. I think there's in any government situation where we see lack of funding for the programs that funding has been promised to, there's always some root issues that you can go to first. And I think accountability is one of the key issues that applies here. Is there accurate accounting being done about what the costs actually are and what they will be done in the future? With the employee retirement pension plan, what we see is that there really hasn't been real honest accountability about what the future costs will be.
Well, let me just dive in here just for a moment, and then we'll come back to whatever prescription you may have. Accountability also means communication to the people. And we've gone many legislative sessions. We've had many states of the union addresses in which attention hasn't really been focused on the problem of unfunded liabilities. We recently had Hawaii's governor deliver the State of the State address and pronounce that our economy is basically doing better than it has done in quite a long time. The Speaker of the House said the same thing, but neither of them even mentioned the looming problem of the debt that we owe our people of our state, that future generations will have to pay due to these unfunded liabilities. Is this the kind of lack of accountability you're talking about, Kelsey?
Yes, absolutely. And it's been my research that a lot of the accounting that's been done assumes that the money in the pension plans will be receiving a certain amount of interest. And that's something that hasn't been happening due to economic conditions. And so the expectations are that we will have the funding in the future, while solid accounting would prove otherwise.
Well, last year, the state budget director issued a statement that is very, very telling, because he referred to a figure, $500 million. Now, that's not the unfunded liability. The unfunded liabilities are close to $30 billion. But the $500 million, he said, is what last year it would have taken to pay down the $30 billion if we pay $500 million every year for the next 30 years. And that's just to pay down the debt that was accrued by last year. So $500 million. Now, before the legislature started this term, the governor had announced that we have about $500 million in surplus income. And the figure has actually gone higher than that is being used. And plans were discussed on how to spend it. We recently issued a news release in Grassroot Institute, and that is that to do so would be to look at the amount of money you still have in your checking account and decide to go out and expend it on anything you can that you can pay for with your checkbook, not thinking about your mortgage or your long-term liabilities, your loans and other things that are due. And it's this kind of accounting. Erik, are you back with us?
I hope I'm there. Am I here now?
And I know we had some technical difficulties, but if you've been following, we've been talking about the situation of Hawaii's unfunded liabilities, and you're there in Chicago, so you see this from a national perspective as well.
Oh yeah. It's from a political perspective, it's a football that most legislatures and governors kick down the road. If you remember what happened in, I believe it was Wisconsin and even somewhat in Ohio, the governors are having a heck of a time trying to balance the books, so to speak. So it's a real, I think my video went off again. It's a real problem for the, in the political climate. It's a real problem for anything really to get done. And if you take in the Detroit issue, like you mentioned earlier, if you don't do something about it, what happens to your city?
Yes.
It dies. It really does die.
We're going to take a break, but when we come back, Erik, I'd love for you to chime in with some solutions you may see being worked on in other states. This is Keli'i Akina. You're watching E Hana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We will be right back after this short break.
Aloha. I'm Nicole Horry with the Think Tech Commentary. The PUC has established an investigative docket to determine the advisability of an undersea cable connecting the Oahu and Maui electrical grids. It has scheduled public meetings on both Oahu and Maui to invite comments on the proposal. The PUC is investigating whether a transmission cable between the two islands is in the public interest and whether the benefits to ratepayers would exceed the costs of the cable, which DBET estimates would be $700 million. The PUC also wants to know about development risks and how they would be mitigated. With the remarkable increase in PV in the islands and the availability of new grid technologies, it may be possible for each island to generate renewables that meet its own demand, and to have separate renewable grids for each island instead. At the same time, an island that depends heavily on a source of renewables, such as PV, may be vulnerable to local changes in the weather or an unanticipated problem with that single method of energy generation. The ultimate question for the PUC, then, is not simply whether an undersea cable is good for Hawaii, but how we can achieve layered redundancy for a resilient statewide system. ThinkTech believes that a great state needs ample power distribution, and that the proper approach is to start with this undersea cable, not only to bring the separate island grids and the state together, but as part of a strategy to achieve the security and safety of redundant systems. I'm Nicole Horry with this ThinkTech commentary. Mahalo.
Aloha and welcome back to the special edition of E Hana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're letting you see a little bit about what takes place behind the scenes in a think tank when some of the staff sit down and have coffee together and talk. We have with us today a new Grassroot scholar, a professor of economics and politics at West Liberty University in Chicago or outside of Chicago, and hopefully we'll get him out here. He joins us today. That's Dr. Erik Root. Along with him, we have Kelsey Winther, one of our policy interns who actually spent time with us here in Hawaii and continues as a policy intern, and I think you'll hear more from her as time goes on. Folks, let's dive right back into this discussion. Before we move on to another topic, Erik, you see what's going on with unfunded liabilities in Illinois and Chicago in particular. You want to just catch us up briefly as to where this issue may take Hawaii?
Well, yeah. Look, if the legislature doesn't make any hard choices, and in many ways, this is a tough one. They're going to have to renegotiate a lot of what they've promised, so to speak. And there's going to need to be cooperation on both sides, because if there isn't, then if neither side budges, you might say, then there will be, there's the only option is bankruptcy or increased taxes, which will in turn further kill or hurt the economy in the state. But there's going to have to be some sort of renegotiation, if you will. What has usually happened, as I'm sure you know, is that the organizations that want to receive the benefits that they've gotten in the past or negotiated in the past, they've decided to go to court to try and force those states to live up to their to live up to their promises. And in some ways, you can see what's happened when the government hasn't necessarily, and our politicians haven't really sort of told the fiscal line, a good fiscal line.
That's right. And I think you're right that there is going to have to be some sitting down and negotiating. There has to be an understanding. In future programs, I hope we'll be able to deal with the fact that there are states that are taking a look at the best practices for managing the things that are owed to state employees, health care, as well as pension plans. And there is a growing list of best practices. These are put together by organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council. And there are states that are trying to pioneer this, like Oregon. Because I don't want this show to focus solely on that, I'm going to put that aside. But what I'd like to say is this. Hawaii is a very special place. We have a very special history. Yeah. And so what doesn't work is taking a polarized side, being totally pro-union, totally anti-union, because then we end up at the extremes shouting at each other and we don't make headway. The fact is that unions are a very important part of the landscape, and they've been here in Hawaii for a very long time. In fact, we are the third highest unionized state in the entire nation. And whether one has good feelings or bad feelings about that, it's important to recognize that the people in the unions, as well as union leaders, live in the very same economy that everyone else lives in. And so we've got to find some way to say, how can we move the economy forward? I think everybody would like to see these liabilities funded. And that's going to take some creative solutions. It's going to take some fiscal policy changes. It's going to take best practices. It's going to take some brilliant ideas for building the Hawaii economy. And it's going to take a great deal of discipline. But I think that as we look at ways in which we all in the same boat can move together and raise the water level, we can find solutions, which brings me to one of the functions of Grassroot Institute. We are a research institute, and so we are part of a network in 50 states, the State Policy Network, that accesses scholars, PhDs, lawyers, researchers, economists, political scientists, and we have their research available. Many of them are scholars with us at Grassroot Institute, like Dr. Erik Root, whom you're meeting today. But in addition to that, we have a passion and a heart to see life improve, to bring Hawaii's people together for a better economy, a better government, a better society. And so rather than taking abstract positions and saying this is the only way, we look for ways in which we can e hana kako. Let's work together, unite Hawaii's people for a better economy, government, and society. And that brings me to another area, and I want to go back to Kelsey with this because I know you've done some research for us on it. And that is education. Hawaii has a central school system. The school districts on all the counties are controlled by a single school system under the governor and the Board of Education. This gives unique strengths to us in terms of certain economies of scale. It also creates many inefficiencies and difficulties for management here in the state. The bottom line is this. We care at Grassroot Institute, as do I think most people in Hawaii, about the quality of education that children receive, about what happens in the classroom. Kelsey, any thoughts on what's going on in our education system and what we may want to do about that?
Yeah, I think one of the most important principles to remember about education is that decentralization always results in better education. And for example, we won't want to have uniform curriculum for, say, students in New York City, a student at a school in rural Kentucky. What they're interested in and what is going to benefit them in the future is going to be slightly different. And I think the same applies for Hawaii, that it's important that we really think about the needs of the individual students. And this applies in encouraging decentralization among Hawaii's schools, but also in providing options for families. So families can decide what is the best possible place that their student can be in.
Well, you know, when you say decentralization, it's a word that can strike some trepidation, some angst, fear in those who are invested in the centrality of the system. And so we want to be sensitive. There are those whose job it is to build the unions. There are those who are in the government and govern from a central frame of reference. And so I think it's also helpful when talking about decentralization to talk about the goods that we actually want to take place instead of the centralization. Goods such as empowering people at the grassroots level in terms of parents to have control over their dollars, as well as control over the choices that are made educationally for their children, so that they have many options from which to choose and can allow those options that are best suited to flourish through competition and so forth, and casting their votes by casting their dollars, so to speak. See, there's a lot of good that happens. Another good is this, and I'm going to get to Erik with a question about this. When we have parents and counties, or neighborhoods even, responsible for the local school, then you've got the investment of the people who live around the school. And in most cases, I think in at least 48 states, it is predominantly the case that schools are funded, public schools are funded directly out of property taxes. Interestingly, here in Hawaii, we don't do it that way. The property taxes go to the state, and ultimately the state, from its own coffers, determines what goes to education. Erik, what does this sound like in terms of who pulls the purse strings and the whole issue of accountability? I know that in California or Chicago, wherever you are, if you own the property near the school, the quality of the school affects the value of your property. That's right. You may have no charity in your heart, but you at least have a financial vested interest in the quality of the school.
That's true. You know, that's totally true. What's happening in Illinois and some other states that do have this funding mechanism for schooling is that people will try to get grafted into the school that's not necessarily in their district, but is a better school than the one that's in their district, so they can take advantage of the good school that is happen to be in, you know, better areas usually, or at least those areas that have higher property values. You know, these things. I will say this, that you struck on something that was very important here, and that is, you know, ultimately freedom of choice.
Yes.
And it's not only the parents. You know, the parents certainly in K through 12 education should have the choice or the freedom to send their child to a school that they want to, but also you have to think of the children here too. And they, you know, some schools, especially charter schools, some very good ones out there who specialize in education or a type of education, and they're very proficient at it, that can teach children or kids who learn in maybe a different way, or have different skill sets, have specialized skill sets. And it would be, you know, the more freedom we have, or the more choice we have in K through 12 education in particular, the better off these students will be, and we'll have a more learned populace, a more learned citizenry, if people have more freedom and choice.
Absolutely. Education not only affects the quality of life, it affects the economy, it
Absolutely.
affects the future. One of the things I love about my predecessor and ongoing mentor, the former president of Grassroot Institute, founder, and currently the chairman of the board, Richard Rowland, is his insistence that ultimately all issues boil down to a question of, are we going up or are we going down? Are we going up in terms of individual liberty, or are we going down? Are we going up in terms of the freer markets, or are we going down? Are we going up in terms of limited accountable government, or are we going down? And so I like to apply that grid. We do this at Grassroot Institute frequently. We apply this grid to every issue, and this would be a great place simply to apply it. And I'm going to ask you, Kelsey, it's kind of like a table game. In terms of individual liberty, what does having a centralized school district, how does that come across in terms of raising or lowering individual liberty and choice?
I would say the more centralized school district, the less liberty and choice there is. When it's more localized, parents are able to have more of a say in both the academics, but also the culture of the school.
How about freer markets? What do you say about that?
I think we're going down in that area as well, as we see less economic liberty and more regulation and bureaucracy.
And if we decentralize and schools had to draw money to them by the quality of what they offer, we'd create competition at a higher level and have freer markets. Finally, this last one before we take a break, Kelsey, it's an easy one. With centralization, do we have more or less limited accountable government?
We definitely have less accountability with a more centralized system.
Well, on that note, we hope you'll come back right after this break. You're watching a bit of policy talk between some of the team at Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. This is a Hanakako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, and we'll be right back after this short message.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Well, thank you for being with us today on E Hanakako. We are a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'd like to thank Jay Fidel for the wonderful work he's doing as producer of the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. And you can find the work that the network does. I think it's about 15 to 20 hours of original content every week that goes out across the world. You can find it at thinktechhawaii.com, our website. In addition to that, this program is sponsored by the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, of which I have the privilege of being president and CEO. We want to bring Hawaii's people together to work for a better economy, government, and society. And as we mentioned in the last segment, we care deeply about building greater liberty, individual liberty and choice, freer markets, and limited accountable government. And with that said, we'll take a look at what a couple of people who contribute to our work have to say. Erik, a new Grassroot Institute scholar, professor of political economy at West Liberty University outside of Chicago, and Kelsey Winther, one of our policy interns. Erik, what would you do if you were king? Actually, if you were king, you'd probably abdicate the throne because you believe
Libertarian principle number one is I'm not going to become king.
That's right. Well, the big question that tends to ultimately answer questions of what we can do and cannot do, or what we attempt, is the economy. Here in Hawaii, we are dealing with an economy that in the 20th century became highly centralized in terms of a handful of corporate entities, became very much part of a governing political party, and is somewhat protected by acts like the Jones Act, which limits shipping. What are your thoughts about the Hawaii economy as a political economist?
Well, I believe that the freer Hawaii can be, and it would be the same at any I would say this in any country, state, no matter what, no matter where you are. The freer you are, the more quality you're going to have in your goods, the more choices you're going to have, and the lower prices you'll have for the goods that you want. Not only that, but it's amazing how the free market sort of works in this regard. Although, you could say it's not the most efficient, it is the most efficient mechanism we have for consumers to tell businesses or innovators or entrepreneurs what we actually want,
well,
what we would like to have in our life to make our lives easier.
Before going on, Erik, define for us what the free market or the freer market is.
Well, it would essentially, in terms of the government, I mean, most people think, well, what the government would do. The government would, of course, keep us safe. How that's worked out, it could be up to the community, between, different communities. So to protect us, but also to secure our rights and freedom to pursue, to the best of our ability, that which makes us happy. So a freer market in this sense, especially in the modern world, would be really a couple of things. One thing that a lot of people don't like hearing is maybe deregulating some portions of the market, whatever that might be. You could even say that for healthcare. One of the reasons why healthcare hasn't worked even up until the Affordable Care Act is because it was over-regulated. There really wasn't a lot of freedom of choice in that market, so to speak. So I would say, first of all, some deregulation probably of the market, but also lower taxes. I think we all could benefit from both state, local, and lower federal taxes. Though, I mean, that's easier said. We could unpack that and spend a whole show on that, but that would be my short answer.
Kelsey, you've lived here. You've seen what it takes to go when you go shopping, what prices are like compared to parts of California and so forth. Any thoughts you have on Hawaii's economy and what we might be able to do about it?
I think Hawaii is a really unique setting. In a lot of places, it's easy to say, well, freer markets are always going to cause a better product at a lower price. I think Hawaii is unique because the difficulty sometimes in getting products to the islands can cause higher prices and more scarcity. But I think that just highlights the even greater need for a free market to be able to control that rather than government regulation. The reason why free markets work so well is because, as Erik commented on, it allows coordination to happen, that consumers demand a certain amount of a product and producers can provide that. And when you have government interference, that economic calculation doesn't happen correctly. And so the less regulation we can have and the more free markets, the more there's mutually beneficial exchange for both the producers of a good and the consumers. And this applies to all aspects of the economy, whether it's employment or shipping or producing and buying and selling, even the tourism industry. The more free market we have, the more the right products are in the right place at the right time.
I like the way you described how the free market works. in terms of the government staying out of the basic process that allows businesses to compete, allowing supply and demand to meet at a reasonable point, and setting the price structure there rather than depending upon government intervention. Now, one of the things I love to clarify, though, is that when we're really talking about our economic policy at Grassroot Institute and in terms of people who think along our lines, we're not talking about free market in the most absolute sense, that there is no government whatsoever, no regulation, and so forth. That's why I frequently like the term freer market. And that tells us that there is a role for government, but there's also a role for moving toward letting the market forces work themselves, and ultimately the fundamental force, which is competitive free enterprise, that when businesses and individuals are allowed to compete on a level playing field, that the best producers rise up, and ultimately the consumers win by the best products at the best prices. That's a very simple model, and yet it gets complicated the more we bring in subsidies or regulation or opportunities for there to take the playing field and make it less than level. But here is something I'd like to ask either of you to respond to. Very often, an argument used against freer markets is the need to care for those who do not benefit directly by being players in the competitive marketplace. The poor, the ones who are beneath the poverty line, or the ones who are struggling, the disadvantaged, the homeless, those without education, and so forth. And the need society has to take care of them. It is sometimes argued here in Hawaii that because of the difficult economic conditions that we have, we need to have a high level of government intervention and involvement in the market in order to take care of those who are least able to compete within the marketplace. What are your thoughts about this, Erik or Kelsey?
Well, I can go first, and then let Kelsey, sort of chime in as well if you want. I would say this. I totally do understand the fear that people have when you say that, well, if you're talking about free market, then some of these safety net mechanisms that you're talking about sort of go away. And there is one thing that I would point out. It was in the newspaper. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal this last week. That when was the war on poverty noted by LBJ in the 1960s, right? So the war on poverty has been in many ways an abject failure. Now, does it help some people? Absolutely it does. But I think what we forget in all of this is that real, humane, mediating institutions that usually come from the private sector or even our churches care for and do a very good job at providing the services that people really need when they are, poor, down on their luck, run through a speed bump in the road of life, that type of thing. And we need to, at least recognize that many of these mediating institutions have done a very fine job on sort of helping people pick themselves back up and get going again.
Well, we'll come back after a quick break and hear what Kelsey has to say, and I'll also mention a study that has actually taken a look at this question. I'm Keli'i Aquino with the Grassroot Institute. We'll be right back after this short break.
Aloha, I'm Maria Kashem of Think Tech Hawaii, and I want to tell you about our Think Tech talk shows. If you didn't know it, Think Tech streams video and audio for all of its shows live on the internet from 2 to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon, and we replay them all night long on Ustream.tv. Visit thinktechhawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links. Raise your awareness on Think Tech. I'm Maria Kashem, and I'll see you there.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel of Think Tech. We have some news for you. In addition to our Think Tech TV show and our Asia in Review show on Olelo 54, as of January 1st, we're adding Community Matters to play also 2 hours a week. Check out thinktechhawaii.com for the specific times of each of these shows. We hope you enjoy all three. Mahalo, I'm Jay Fidel.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako. We're a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Today we've been doing a little bit of policy talk. bringing you in-house to talk with some of the team members of the Grassroot Institute. Myself here, Keli'i Akina in Honolulu, policy intern Kelsey Winther in California, and Dr. Erik Root, who is one of our political economists in Chicago. And Erik, we welcome today as a Grassroot scholar, and he's working his way west. Go west, young man, and eventually
I'm trying.
you're going to be here. By the way, just real quickly, you have something personal here on Maui, of all places. You want to tell our folks?
My sister lives on Maui.
There you go.
And my sister lives on Maui, and I have friends on the Big Island, good friends on the Big Island, and really good friends that teach at Chaminade University there in
There we go.
Oahu.
Okay, so you had the choice, obviously, to become a senior fellow in residence at the Cato Institute or the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., but you decided Hawaii, the Grassroot Institute, because your sister's on Maui. That makes...
That's right.
Now, Kelsey, you were going to respond to a question we were looking at, and that is, yes, we believe in the promotion of freer markets and having a way in which the government will pull itself back from its high levels of involvement in the economy. But some object to that, saying we need a high level of government intervention for those who are not able to compete in the free market, whether that be the poor, the indigent, or even certain businesses that are not able to compete with others. What are your thoughts about that, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that as the economy overall improves, it helps those who are at the bottom as well. And so when companies are able to thrive, they can employ more people, which ultimately helps those individuals that are struggling to find work. There are definitely going to be those people, as Erik mentioned, who for whatever reason just can't work and who do need charity from an outside source. And I think he did a great job of explaining why we do have both private organizations and religious organizations that can really help and invest and support those people far more effectively than our welfare system can. We've seen that documented over time.
Well put, and some of that documentation was put together by Stephen Moore. Those of you who read our website will see an article from him from time to time. Stephen Moore is a writer whose work appears in the Wall Street Journal, and he's written a book called Who's the Fairest of Them All? And in this book, he looks at the question, what kind of societies take care of the poor, the people who can't participate significantly in the economic markets. And this is what the research shows from across the world when we look at every form of economic organization. The ones that perform worst and have the greatest problem of poverty are the ones that have the highest level of central control over the economy. And this historically has been proven throughout the 20th century. The data is there. And the places where the poor are best cared for and where the middle class grows the most happen to be the places where there's the least government central control over the economy. And the data is there as well. And so I think one of the things that's very important to point out is that when we talk about freer markets, we're doing so not from the point of view of trying to bring down the government. We're doing so from the point of view of trying to do what actually is healthy for the economy, for the people, and results in the better welfare of all the people throughout the state. Well, I want to thank both of you for being with us today. It's been fun, and I look forward to a time when we can do what we've just done in a less virtual way, sitting down and having coffee together. Kelsey, any last thoughts that you may have? If I give you a minute just to address our viewers, and they're all across the world. We're glad you're on the team, Kelsey.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. It's really exciting to look into the issues in Hawaii and see how we can actually improve the quality of life for people there. And there's a lot of complex issues. And Hawaii, I think, is a unique situation. But in that, it gives us a unique opportunity to really be an example and to be a model of an area where we can see economic freedom and better improvement in education and all these areas we discussed. I think it's really exciting to see what the Grassroot Institute is doing and to get involved in that.
Well, Kelsey, thank you for being on the Grassroot team, and we'll look for a way to get you out here as soon as we possibly can. But enjoy California in the meantime. By the way, we're also acknowledging that today's program is about welcoming our newest Grassroot Institute scholar, someone whose research is going to fuel the work that we do, and we're glad that we're going to be able to do this with Dr. Erik Root. Erik, it's been great having you on the program today. We need another political economist.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're going to fill that role. In a closing minute, do you want to say something to our viewers?
Yeah, sure. I want to thank you for inviting me on today and giving me this time to get to know everyone and to talk about the most serious issues that involve our state and local governments today and in this century. And I really look forward to the relationship, and I really look forward to you taking me out of this cold weather and moving. I might even just go see Kelly over there just to get out of the snow and the sub-freezing temperatures right now.
There we go. Well, Kelsey and Erik, thanks very much for being with us today. And to all of you who are watching, Ehana Kako, which means let's work together, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're delighted that you were with us today. At the Grassroot Institute, we believe in building a better Hawaii by bringing people together for a better economy, government, and society. Thanks for watching. Visit us on our website, Grassroot, that's singular, grassrootinstitute.org. And until next week, aloha.